My name is Joel Garcia. I'm an artist and cultural worker, born and raised here in Los Angeles. Before we begin, we want to pay recognition to where we're at. And so with great respect, the Goethe-Institut acknowledges the Yavitam and the place where we're at, which has been known as Yangna, the ancestral name of Los Angeles. And we do this to also recognize the Yavitam descendants, who we now know as the Tongva and the Fernandino Tataviam Nation. We also understand that their elders, past and present, are here, so we want to pay respect to them and acknowledge the contributions that they've had in taking care of these lands. And as guests here in Los Angeles, a word that they use, kuyam, as guests, we want to do our best in paying forward and taking care of this place that we now recognize as Los Angeles. Thank you for being here, and I'll pass it off to Lian.
Thank you so much, Joel. Hello and welcome. My name is Lian Heinrich-Selema. I'm director of the Goethe-Institut here in Los Angeles. And I would like to welcome everybody to this discussion, Disruptive Representation and the Limits of Diversity. This project is part of the Neighborhood Interpretive Center, which is a hyperlocal initiative of cultural programs that focus on the neighborhood where we are today, MacArthur Park, Westlake. And if you are not from LA, this is a neighborhood with a very unique history and diverse cultures and people that have met here and still meet today. It's a very diverse community with a lot of people of color living here, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian American, Black, immigrant, diaspora communities have met here for a long time and reside here. And the Neighborhood Interpretive Center will present 5 projects throughout the year, including the Festival de Barillet by Byron Jose, Vibing with Cultural Leaves by Paleta Pierce and her collaborators, Voices in the Water by Robin Garcia and Nefertiti Altan, Disrupting the Mainstream by the Frida Kahlo Theater, and Encounters by Omis Unidos. I would now like to introduce our discussion partners of today. Mohamed Amjahid was born as the son of so-called guest workers in Frankfurt am Main and studied political science in Berlin and Cairo. After completing his master's degree, Amjahid worked for several prominent German newspapers, including Die Zeit, where I encountered his work for the first time and have been following ever since. He's now a freelance investigative journalist, currently working on several new book projects, and his latest book is called Der weiße Fleck, Whitewash, A Guide to Antiracist Thinking. And then we're happy to have Alice Hasters with us. She was born in Cologne in 1989 and works as an author in Berlin, for example, for Rundfunk Brandenburg-Berlin, Tagesschau und Deutschlandfunk. Together with Maxi Hecke, she talks about feminism and pop culture in the monthly podcast Feuer und Brot. Her book, Was weiße Menschen nicht über Rassismus hören wollen, aber wissen sollten, What White People Don't Want to Hear About Racism but Should Know, was published by Hanseblau in 2019 and became a bestseller. I would also like to thank our partner, the Thomas Mann House, in this discussion series today that accompanies the Neighborhood Interpretive Center. Thank you for being with us in LA. Thank you for being with us in the live stream. And I hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Leanne, so much. Thank you, Joelle. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Before we start our conversation, I would like to acknowledge that the people of Ukraine are being attacked right now by the Russian regime. As we are speaking, please read up, get your information from independent media, and show solidarity if you can. There are different ways and possibilities to do that. We would like to discuss today 45 minutes. I'm so happy to be with you here, Alice.
Thank you.
About the limits of diversity and disruptive representation. And to kickstart our conversation, Alice would share some conceptual thoughts about our topic.
Okay, I'm so happy to be here too. Thank you. Yeah, so we were talking about this yesterday. When I think about the concept of diversity, it is oftentimes people think of different things when they say it, and I would say there are like within the critique or the advocating of diversity, I think there are basically three ways to look at diversity and what it can do. And I think the first one, and the one that we are criticizing, is the non-disruptive approach of diversity, which is often implemented in corporate structures by diversity trainings or similar things as that, diversity campaigns, which kind of is based on the idea that nothing really has to change when it comes to structures, but it should just be a more diverse picture. Like the people, there will still people on the top, and there will still be people on the bottom, but it's just a more diverse group on the top and a more diverse group on the bottom, which there is it's highly questionable if that is the redistribution that we should aim for. Secondly, I think there is a little bit of a dystopian view on diversity, which is when it comes to from a marginalized or non-white perspective, diversity can be scary and a burden to carry. Thinking of when you enter structures that are not made for you, you either have the choice of giving up yourself, giving up who you are to make it within these structures, and then you enter these structures, but they will still not value you, and you end up being disconnected from your community and not really arriving where you were trying to get to. So this big failing of society, we were talking about the movie Sorry to Bother You as an example of that kind of thinking. And then there's a more hopeful approach that if that diversity will be disruptive, that it can be that if people will take the approach of diversity seriously, it will automatically come with a change of structures, because diversity can only be possible. People can only it can only be possible if you change the way we work, change the way we distribute resources, because right now if you look at various landscapes or various institutions, they're all catered to a white, patriarchal, heteronormative way of living. And if you really want to diversify institutions, then you will have to change these ways. So there's also this hopeful notion, but then also it has to be that diversity has to be disruptive, has to be uncomfortable, kind of. But the risk within that is that the burden of changing these structures lie on the people who are actually labeled as the people being the diverse people, bringing the diversity. So we need to make sure that it's not only on the people entering structures, disrupting these structures, that are taking the hit or taking the burden of changing these ways. Yeah, that was, these are my thoughts on diversity when we were talking about it yesterday.
Yeah, we were talking for hours
Yeah.
yesterday. Don't worry, 45 minutes, I promise, only. But your thoughts really also helped me to prepare for today. And again, just, think about so many situations where I could come up with examples where diversity actually was bothering me, and the whole diversity discourse was bothering me. So we were yesterday also throwing examples at each other, and maybe would like to share some of them. And one of the examples that came into my mind, I know like a lot of people, they don't like soccer here in the US, but last championship, the last European championship in soccer was dominated by the rainbow discussion, where the Hungarian government, which is a very right-leaning, conservative, right-wing government, is really endangering queer lives, not only in Hungary but also abroad with their discourses and the tournament. A lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, they wanted to dip the tournament in rainbow flags, and Hungary didn't like that. And there was this game where the Hungarian soccer team was playing in Munich, and the arena in Munich wanted to enlight the arena in rainbow flags. But, all the organizations in soccer worldwide, they're very corrupt and bad. So the UEFA said no rainbow in our tournament. What happened then was interesting for our conversation, because a lot of companies and institutions would come out and dip their logos actually and their social media accounts in these rainbow flags as a sign of solidarity with queer lives. And then there was this moment where Frontex, that's the agency that is actually protecting the borders of the European Union, came out with a tweet like full of rainbow emojis and a rainbow flag. And that was the moment where it was like, no, this kind of diversity is actually harmful, because Frontex, as it's happening here in the US South, in California, for example, is responsible for actually killing queer people, queer refugees trying to flee from regimes. So what does it mean when such an institution comes out as like, oh, look, we have like a rainbow on our logo, and we celebrate diversity, and at the same time the very existence of this institution is endangering so-called diverse groups, which is
Yeah.
like a
It's
weird term to use, but yeah.
No, but it's true. So that would be an example for this actually harmful or performative, non-disruptive kind of diversity approach, when it doesn't really, it's not supposed to change anything really, but it's just an opportunity to shed yourself in positive light. And you see that in this very hyper capitalist world, you see that a lot happening, especially with movements that do provide such things as symbols, as so-called like slogans or sayings. This is why it happens a lot with the rainbow flag. Also, it happens a lot with Black Lives Matter. So people want to implement and incorporate these these things without really contributing to the cause. And it's interesting because in that also with that example that you just mentioned, it's always easy to, or what happens a lot of times is to critique the lack of diversity somewhere else. Like everybody's critiquing, Frontex is critiquing the homophobia of the UEFA in that, like that doesn't make when there's obviously a lack of a larger understanding of oppressive systems. And I think even though in the heat of the moment, when these debates get really heated and then people come out with this quick response symbolism, there's for a lot of people maybe this urge to be relieved or be thankful. And I think because there's such a longing for being seen, being represented, being acknowledged, but in fact, I think as you need to be really careful in when you're tokenized, and not as an individual even, but as a movement, or when your struggle is being tokenized too. Yeah.
Actually, the question that I always have is how sustainable this critique is. And if I look at this example with the rainbow flag, it was actually very satisfying to see a lot of queer people coming forward and saying this is not okay, but also a lot of non-queer people immediately dismantling this kind of pinkwashing at the end. But at the same time, it's like there are very deep and complicated structures behind this, because another example would be that a lot of car companies in Germany, they came also out with their rainbow tweets, knowing that most of them, they take advantage of cheap labor costs in Hungary and sustaining this government at the same time. So the way we need to look at this is not only, it's maybe the reaction of giving visibility to a very important cause. I'm not advocating for not tweeting a rainbow flag here, but it's like always very good and healing to have a critical look to actually the politics of very powerful stakeholders like those companies or an agency like Frontex.
Definitely. I also think there's, as you mentioned already, the complex structures of it, because there is also something, you could call it like relative diversity, in a sense that, of course, Frontex or car companies, German car companies, within their structures could work for a more diverse group for working for them. Does it make a difference if the head of Frontex would be a black woman, for example? Is that the kind of diversity that we want? Is that something? Would that really change something? I think there's also, and I also want to emphasize that we both are not against approaches to diversity. I think it's really important, and I think it is inevitable to for changing oppressive structures to diversify institutions, definitely. But you also have to ask yourself what values, do people bring to the table, And it's sometimes, I think you mentioned it too, when it comes to, when there are people who are, this is, I think, the classic problem of tokenizing, when you have somebody who is, is seen as a representative of a marginalized group, but very much is emphasizing or is manifesting certain structures, when there is, a black person advocating to put more money into police departments, for example, or something like that, then it's there can be a strategic way to place people in positions of power or at least positions of representation to actually do their quote-unquote dirty work for them. And that can be beneficial for the individual, meaning being in a high position, being this person that now earns a lot of money and has a lot of influence, but doesn't really use the influence to actually help to bring a more just society. So, yeah.
Knowing at the same time that no single person can represent a whole community.
Definitely,
That's a very big mistake. This diversity politics actually is, as you said earlier, that it's a burden actually on a single person to speak for all black people, because that's now the black person in that position, for example, or the person that you read as Muslim, that now it's like, you know, it's like that person is representing the whole Muslim community in this country.
And of course they will disappoint then, because not one group has one set of values or one set of vision, or it's not even that just because you're marginalized, you're for an equal society necessarily. It's not even that people who, you can't expect from people just because they are also historically or also in the present affected by structures of homophobia, xenophobia, racism, sexism, that they are actively working to dismantle those. Why should they work more to dismantle these structures than people who are not affected by it? You could also make that argument that it's not their task, or it's why should they really take care of it. But I think it's also, so it's always hard to, I think I really I don't have an answer for that necessarily. How can you, because it always comes to me that an effect of being marginalized will always be that you will not be able to enter certain institutions or certain rooms without that burden. That will always come with you. And so I sometimes myself am catching myself leaning towards this a little bit of dystopian view of diversity, being scared of that these structures are more powerful than the people trying to enter these structures and trying to dismantle them. I mean, please don't take my dystopian thinking as a role model.
No, I second that. Please don't take it. It's Saturday and it's nice weather. But
it's nice
like,
weather. I want to remain hopeful, but sometimes I just catch myself being very, thinking it's really, it's a burden, and it's really hard to really break open these structures. Especially, I mean, there are always also different ways. I mean, there's always the second problem is that, you know, what is the alternative is not going into these structures and not doing that and organizing and doing something community-based, building structures for yourself that are catered to your needs, definitely, but I think that is very necessary, but I think that won't be enough since we're already in that situation where there's a large imbalance of resources. So the money, the resources, the land, the buildings, things that people need to build up structures, they are already in the hands of certain institutions. So you do have to have these people entering these institutions and opening them up for more diverse people or different various communities. So yeah, I think there's always, because I also encounter people who say, well, why would you go into these structures anyway? They're harmful for you. Don't do it. But I think and then people always sometimes also being heavily critiqued and ostracized as being a token and being a traitor and something like that. There's also, I think, yeah, this is also sometimes for me it's hard to navigate that.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think it's okay to be as like member of a marginalized community in a certain institution and having that critique.
Definitely.
It doesn't say that the critique cannot exist or that you cannot be in that institution. The question is also, or the fact that you are, of course, more than just a black person, or more than just like Mohammed, or more than just like a woman representing womanhood or whatever in that institution. You mentioned that person advocating for more investments into the police. It's like, it's not like a theoretical example. We were talking also yesterday about the new mayor of New York, Eric Adams. That's a black man.
Exactly.
Who is a former NYPD officer. And I would say maybe we can also have the headline, former NYPD officer is the new mayor of New York. But of course there is this black man, and it's like a historical thing in this country to have a black person in that kind of position. But if you go back to the news and you read that he just presented his new budget for the city and that he made cuts to all departments except the NYPD, then at least I think about, okay, is he there more as that former NYPD officer? Then I read more and I discover that he appointed more former NYPD officers to other very important positions in the city. So this is also the possibility of having that representation, which is important, especially for younger people, for kids also to see that you can be the mayor of Los Angeles or New York or the president or whatever, and at the same time being able to go back to values and impact actually, and speak out your critiques. The question that I have always in mind, what do I want actually? By nagging all the time and saying, oh no, that's not okay, because I have a very simple life as an author. I'm like, I have the microphone, you have, I don't know.
Yeah, we just talk.
Like, we talk. We're like, oh, that's bad, and that's bad, and that's bad, and Goethe-Institut, don't do that, and this, don't do this, and whatever. But when I go, for example, to a bank, and I say, it's ridiculous that you have diversity trainings for your managers while you are investing in harming different communities. For example, indigenous communities, in stealing their land for oil companies, or harming women in Bangladesh for exploiting them to produce cheap goods, for example. What do I want from these managers? What do I want from the bank? That's a question, actually. It's like
because is it better to, because with that critique, they could take away from it, oh, so we shouldn't be more diverse. We shouldn't make an effort to hire other people than white, straight, cis men, because people don't want that. People could hear that out of the critique that we're placing. So the question is it really better to have a more diverse bank, for example, or a more diverse Frontex, more diverse, all of these things that are actually, that we deem as exploitative, and is that because it's benefiting individuals to be in these positions, but there's also, so you would have to believe in the trickle-down effect that you also, again, burden people. Say a black person is, in some high position of this bank and getting a lot of money, you expect this person as an individual to do something with that money, to put it back into the community, while his white colleague or her white colleague or their white colleague is not burdened with that responsibility. So that is, so sometimes I think also we need to, is that, how do we push values and diversity at the same time? You know, they are connected, but they're also not the same. And sometimes a lot of times I see how people think one thing will automatically come with another. That people who will have some set of values will automatically be a diverse group, or vice versa, which is not necessarily a given. But the ideal is that it should be both.
And it can be both, actually.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I remember a couple of days ago, we had a very interesting conversation here in the Goethe-Institut, also with Joelle, and the strategic question of looking in an institution for that one person who understands my struggle, actually, and we can work with each other, maybe be friends, and maybe that person will be the day after tomorrow the president or whatever, to be able to do that change. So I'm also like I'm also not saying that it's not possible to have that strategic alliances from outside a certain institution, and then someone who is like able to shape how the budget is decided, for example, to empower a certain community in here, for example, in Los Angeles. But at the same time, that diverse bank, it's not a theoretical thought, actually, to say the diverse bank is very good in exploiting different communities. If you go, I'm born in Frankfurt. Frankfurt is the hub of banks, and the, for example, if you want to say, it's like German Wall Street. And if you go to Frankfurt, it's such a diverse city. If you go to the bank neighborhood, to downtown Frankfurt, you see people from all over the world, because the banks, I think, understood very well that they are using the diverse knowledge of all those people coming from all over the world to be able to take more advantage of resources and grabbing them from communities. So there you have like a good example where disruptive representation cannot be that on your brochure you have like all kinds of skin colors, actually. That you really need to ask yourself, can I stand for this diversity and work in this position as a manager where I hit the button to invest in an oil company that will destroy lives in Nigeria, for example. And this is very harsh, because I'm asking a lot, actually. I'm asking that manager actually to go look for another job, you know? But at the same time, it's like, it's my and our role to be the party pooper and nag all the time and say it's not enough, actually. It's more dangerous to put that facade and say, oh, we have actually 50% women in our company that exports weapons to the Middle East. I'm like, okay, good for you, good for the women, actually, but you are killing actually women right now in Yemen, for example.
Yeah. So it's, I think the point of this talk is not to say, okay, yeah, don't diversify your companies, but it's also, it will not shield you from certain critiques if you don't change the position of your company or the harm that is doing to that it is doing to the world. Frontex will never be an institution that I can support.
It's like you need to abolish Frontex. You need to
Exactly.
abolish ICE. You cannot have in this country diversity in ICE, because sometimes I see the documentaries and stuff, and you have this Latinx person working at ICE, and I'm not talking personally to that person because I don't know, but you cannot change what ICE is, actually. The identity, the DNA of this institution is harming marginalized, underserved communities, people that cannot have a voice that is heard here. And you cannot tell me that by, you know, celebrating Black History Month within ICE is like you are doing things actually worse. And this is like important just for me to outline that sometimes it's easy to look for this actually easy answers, because diversity can be a very easy answer, you know?
Yeah. What I'm just thinking is, when you say you need to abolish ICE and you need to abolish Frontex, definitely very much with you on that. But there's still, you could still also coming back to relative diversity, because it can be beneficial, or it can be a different experience, maybe a little bit of it can change a lot if people working in ICE do speak the language of the people coming, the refugees. It can make, like, subtle, like maybe on an individual level, it can also change. It can make certain situations better, which, so sometimes I'm thinking of, yeah, there are levels of, is it not worth it to, since ICE is still around, since Frontex is still around, since banks are still around, it's sometimes I'm wondering, should we even engage in these conversations, or should we skip them because we are saying, well, but at the end of the day, it's not worth making your institution better because we don't want your institution. Aiming for the big thing, or can it be beneficial to have to actually change the structures because it's not going to be abolished tomorrow. So since then, make it. I'm not sure. I'm asking myself these things as I'm speaking. But this is something that I am conflicted with. That I sometimes think, does it make a difference when there's
Definitely, I love the fact that our conversation is spicing up a little bit. And I'm also a very pragmatic person, because I'm a reporter and I see a lot of violence and I see a lot of people suffering. And I do understand that in the moment, maybe it's very important to have that situation that you have a person, even though that person is on the wrong side, being able to connect with the person that is in need for attention, or, you know, at the border, for example, if you have someone who actually understands what it means to be in that kind of situation as a refugee, for example. At the same time, there's something within me very cynical saying, okay, cute that the ICE officer can explain in Spanish that single mother that she has to go back to the war zone. You know, it's like how my interpretation of what I want to do, at least as an author, is to always point out the structural problem by somehow keeping the balance of acknowledging that in some moments it's good to have some people in some positions, actually. I'm not sure that there is like an answer that is valid for all kind of examples that we are discussing here today.
Yeah.
I don't think so, actually. We need to start this conversation each time we are talking about a certain space. Each time we are talking about some news coming up. Each time we are talking about, like, it makes a difference if you talk about, you know, ICE, or if you talk about the NYPD and racial profiling, for example.
Or if you talk about, you know, universities or ICE,
yeah,
or something.
Or ICE,
Yeah.
you know, and it's okay to whatever you know, to have these questions and to, while speaking, learning, and not having this, you know, ideological, it has to be like this or like this, but sticking to the facts, because the fact is that an institution like Frontex and ICE, they are like killing people. And by saying this blatantly, you also take the opportunity from the political decision makers to find these easy solutions.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's actually, at the end of the day, there is this discussion is about reform versus abolishment. because diversity is actually an approach to reform certain institutions, and sometimes reform will not do it. So, and that especially comes, that actually, or that is specifically true for institutions that do hold power and do have also, a permission to use violence and something that these institutions, they are not reformable in that sense. I mean, at the end of the day, I think oftentimes reform and abolishment, in a realistic term, they often, in some processes, do look the same, but then they go in different directions, or they stop sooner as the other one. But at the end, we are circling back to why diversity. Why do we want diversity? What do we want? What kind of society do we want at the end of the day? And that meaning that a non-disruptive kind of reform approach of diversity will not go far enough, and will not save us from exploitation, and will not save us from certain things that will come our way if we don't change systems of oppression. But it maybe while we are working on abolishing these systems and these structures, in the meantime, it could look similar, that people, that maybe step one is to diversify institutions, so you blow them up from the inside. Sometimes I think, that is sometimes
I
a
love
little
the
bit.
image you are painting, actually. But at this, we have 5 minutes left, and
Yeah.
One thing that is very important from my perspective is also positionality in talking about diversity, actually. I'm not in a position to decide. I don't have the power, but I'm also not in the position to decide about representation of black people in institutions, or as a cis man, for example, deciding about representation of women. But as an anthropologist and journalist, my job is also to describe a little bit the situation. And if I can stick with the women's representation topic, is like, I know how ridiculous it is if you are in a newspaper and the people sitting at the table, only men, only cis heterosexual white older men, and they talk about taxing women's hygiene product, for example. This is like comedy, actually. This is not actually, this happened. I was in that room in the second row, and I was like, "Are you guys? Do you see how wrong this is?" And the answer, they didn't. They didn't see it, and they don't see it. But at the same time, I'm sometimes frustrated because representation can be also that easy answer. And a very recent example is that picture we talked about also yesterday from the Munich Security Conference a couple of days ago. You would see on there is like a big long table in Munich, that very important conference where all the people, all the important political decision makers from all over the world, they come to Munich. And there's this picture where you see on that huge table only old white men sitting. And these are, the people deciding in companies, in governments, what to do with international politics in the next couple of years, actually. And we see now how important international politics are by looking at the situation in Ukraine. And the immediate critique of a lot of people, a lot of white feminists were like, these are only men. We need 50% of women representation there. These are men selling weapons, actually, and making a lot of shady deals. Do you really want 50% of representation there? Am I really very keen to see a brown person there also? It's like...
Yeah.
And
is that a loss of energy to is that there's also this question of where do we place our energy and in what do we try to push forward.
Exactly, yes.
And if we because trying to diversify institutions is so much work and so much energy, and thinking of if we finally succeed, there are 50% women selling weapons, is that the goal?
Is that it?
Yeah.
Because I'm very demotivated if that's the goal,
Yeah.
actually. But at the same time, can I say this? That's also a question. But I am a cis man, actually. It's like, because some people would say, you don't talk about women's representation. And I think trying to get out of looking for these easy answers and going into if you have the possibilities, of course, and I'm very privileged as an author, going into the theoretical discussions and to the critiques and having a look is something that we also need to do to get beyond this, social media, or there's a picture and we all like it or dislike it or something.
Yeah.
Diversity discourse.
Yeah. In general, I would say, trying to answer your question,
Please.
I think it doesn't matter. I mean, people are saying there need to be more women there, and then you responding to it, that could also be offensive to some people or seen as anti-feminist or something. But it is not about the representation of women specifically. So it's sometimes, I sometimes retract to like more conceptual things, as you maybe already noticed, that it's not about, they shouldn't be women there, or it's more of the questions, what does diversity mean? So sometimes you can like just dodge this thing, navigate.
A little bit.
It's also because language is important, and sometimes, especially in social media, things can be frustrating because you see some people mean one thing, you read it, see something else, respond to it, then people will also read something else within what you mean. So also sometimes I don't recommend these complex questions for social media, but that's just me. No, but yeah.
And me.
All right.
I think
we're
that's
done.
your time. That's my time. That's
Yeah.
our time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and see you next time, hopefully.